Welcome to another episode of Under the Barbell Strength podcast. I'm your host, Colton Haynes, and if this is your first time tuning in, we'd love for you to follow and subscribe. Feel free to leave us a comment with any questions or topics you'd like for us to cover. The purpose of this podcast is both educational and an opportunity to showcase some incredible coaches I've had the privilege to meet throughout my journey in the strength and conditioning world. I think listeners will enjoy the diverse range of guests who will share their experiences in coaching, enhancing athletic performance, nutritional strategies, speed training, and exploring the mentality of being a strength coach. By uncovering the weight room philosophies and strategies that make these strength coaches successful, you'll gain valuable principles to elevate your own team's performance. So join us as we grow together one conversation at a time. Join us in welcoming Coach Dakota Brovero, who is the Director of Strength and Performance at Wingate University. Coach Brovero graduated and played football at Gettysburg College and later received his master's at Ithaca College. Before Wingate, Coach interned at Temple University, Gettysburg College, and also Villanova. Coach Brovero also has a CSCS through his NCSA. Welcome to the show, Coach.
Thanks, Coach. I appreciate you having me. I've been loving listening to stuff you've been talking with people and putting out.
Yeah, it's great stuff so far, and like I said, great program you have there at Wingate, and I just love to hear how you got to Wingate and talk about your experiences.
Absolutely. So I, like you said, I played football at Gettysburg College, but before that, going into like my junior, senior year of high school, I was looking at potential opportunities, and so my love with strength and conditioning started really young, but that was more for me. It was never really a career idea. But then my junior year in high school, my dad, who used to train me, started his own little nonprofit business, just training a bunch of local kids, me and my high school buddies. And so on the days he couldn't work it, I would kind of step in and help out with that. And I really enjoyed that a lot. Like, it was something fun to see, just to see them improve. And obviously, again, it was very low level, very just minimalist, just basic stuff like boxes, tires, a couple dumbbells, nothing crazy. But it kind of got my love for strength conditioning. So then I went to Gettysburg knowing that I wanted to do this career. And so that kind of helped guide me through my process. 4 years after being at Gettysburg and one internship at Temple University kind of helped me solidify that the collegiate level is definitely where I want to be. I also interned in a private facility. That was a great experience, but definitely wasn't something that I really felt was calling me. And then knowing that and talking to my advisor, to get into the collegiate realm, he told me and explained to me that I needed my master's. And so I started looking around for some programs and some degrees, and I ended up finding Ithaca College. And so I applied there, talked with the head coach then, who was Coach Victor Brown, had great conversations, loved everything he had to say. And so I went forward, applied, interviewed, and fortunately he chose me for that job. So was there for 2 years. And then in between that is when I interned at Villanova University.
Gotcha. You talked about the private sector a little bit. Knowing that you're the director right now, what was the biggest difference in the private sector and college that you see now?
I would definitely say the biggest difference would just have to be, I don't want to say the athlete's level, but just like the involvement. So when I was at the private sector, and there's some great private sectors out there that do a great job of keeping people, but the one I was at, I felt like you kind of had to encourage people to come back, and it was less training and more pleasing. Just to get them to come back and do another training session or just to come back and hang out. Where in the college level, obviously, again, most of the time it's not on their full willingness, but they always have to come in and train, which allows us to be more consistent, allows us not only just to see that improvement in training, but also allows us to build that relationship. Because, 15, 14 weeks out of the semester, I get to hang out with them, I get to develop them, and just get to know them not just as athletes, but just as humans, which is a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, and so talk about your responsibility and role that you have at Wingate right now.
So as you said, I am the director of sports performance here. So I oversee all of the strength conditioning for athletics. But I'm very fortunate that I have a great staff, so I don't have to be involved with all the teams. So the teams I'm directly responsible with are men's and women's lacrosse, women's basketball, indoor volleyball, and then beach volleyball. So those are my teams directly that I program, lead, work in and outside the weight room with, but I also kind of help assist with all the other teams. Now, some teams I'm more involved with than others. It just depends on my schedule as well as the level of coaches we have, because we have 2 GAs, so I'm a little bit more involved with them. Where my assistants and my associate, I trust, right? They're my full-timers. I don't have to feel like I need to be over their shoulder, right? So if I can't make a session, I trust them to be able to handle the situation. They'll get whatever they need to get done, and I'm just here if they need any help.
Got you. And you talked about your staff a little bit. Talk about how many GAs, associate strength coaches y'all have. Just kind of laid out the foundation for us there.
Yeah, so when I first got here in 2021, I was actually a graduate assistant. And so we had my position as a GA, an assistant, and then the director. So we only had 3 people on staff. And then over the 1.5, 2-year span, as I transitioned to that director role, which is a longer story than what we have time for, I ended up taking that role, and they asked me, what do we need? And I said, we need more people, right? I mean, pay is great. We want to get raises at some point, but at the end of the day, we've got 800 plus student athletes. 3 coaches doesn't do the trick. So when I took over, we were able to add a second GA. So we have 2 GAs, and then we were able to add an assistant and an associate position. So if you look at the hierarchy, I'm at the top, and then I have an associate who's my number 2. He's responsible for football and baseball. And then I have 2 assistants that I can rely on, are great coaches that do a great job. One of them is responsible for track and field, field hockey, and then men's soccer. And then the other assistant's in charge of women's soccer, softball, and men's basketball. So they all do a great job with their teams. And then obviously below that is our graduate assistants who work with our cross country and tennis. And then our other GA works with acrobatics and tumbling and golf.
Got you. And, big staff comes big responsibilities for you. How do you develop your assistant strength coaches, GAs? Is there a protocol y'all go through? What things are you teaching them to be a better strength coach?
So I learned this from a strength coach at Lynchburg University. His name is Coach Ed Smith, and he said something at a conference one time, which was hire people that aren't like you, because you don't need another you in the weight room, right? So I know who I am. I know how to program. I know how to train. I don't need somebody else like me, because I give myself headaches sometimes. I couldn't imagine a second person like that. So I try and get newer or different coaches with some new ideas and different thoughts. And so I learn from them as much as they learn from me. The big thing I look at is preparing them for that next step. So my associate ideally goes into that director role. So once he takes over, or once he goes to the next spot, he can take over in that director role. So I give him a lot more administrative responsibilities, some stuff to kind of help guide him. And then I'm there just to kind of chat with him and say, hey, this is a situation that popped up, whether it's my situation or something he might have experienced. And it's like, how do we make this go better? How do we improve this? Or what should we do in this situation? Same thing for my assistants. I try not to tell them how to program X's and O's, right? I want them to be their own coaches, but I'm there just to kind of help guide them, so that way whenever they leave, current student athletes, right, who are here for 4 years don't have to go through a whole new culture change or a whole new switch, right? The similar model, but just maybe the way they actually program changes. And so it makes it easier on the athletes to adjust and adapt as coaches kind of come in and out as they move on to bigger and better positions.
Yeah, so talk about the culture you have at Wingate, not specifically the athletes yet, but as a coaching staff, what is the culture you would say that you give out?
So we're very fortunate that our athletic director was our old head football coach, Coach Joe Reich. He kind of helped instill this culture piece into all of us. And so we have it called EAT. And so it comes down to effort, attitude, and toughness. So it started out really in the football world, kind of expanded into our whole strength and conditioning or sports performance department. And then when Coach Reich became the athletic director, he kind of spread it throughout the entire athletic department. And so effort, attitude, toughness, right, is an easy acronym for us to remember. But more importantly, it's the 3 main things that I feel like you don't need to be really good at as an athlete, right? Like, it's something that's not genetic, it's not skill, it's just what can you do every day. And so effort is the piece of giving us everything you've got when you come in. So I tell my athletes, hey, you had a long final, you studied all night, you didn't get a lot of sleep. That's okay. I'm not expecting you to give me 110% today, but I need you to come in with what you got and try your best to do what we need you to do, right? So that may be, hey, I'm at 40%, then give me 40. It's the minute they give me 10 when they're at 40 that I have an issue with. Attitude is just, again, having the right mindset, and it's important for me, especially as we get further and further away kind of from the COVID era, where everything was like siloed, nobody was together. Now it's trying to bring that back together where, hey, what's a team aspect? It doesn't matter if you're having a great day, because if the rest of your rest of your team is having bad weights, that doesn't help us, right? We need to get better. And so you kind of need to be that Energizer bunny, that juice hype man, whatever it is. So that way today it's you, maybe tomorrow it's somebody else, and it kind of becomes infectious. And then the third one, right? Toughness. Coaches love it. We all use it. But the big thing for me is just doing everything that is expected of them. And executing it even when they feel tired or lazy. So there's a quote somewhere on my wall. I don't know where I had it. I have a lot of quotes on my wall, but it was along the lines of mental toughness for us is not being able to do the hard stuff, but it's being able to do the thing that you're expected to do, whether you want to or not.
Yeah, for the listeners listening, Wingate's a powerhouse. So this kind of stuff you're teaching and programming and instilling in their minds, very important stuff, right? That stuff you can't teach is effort, is athlete willing. So that's awesome. You do all that kind of stuff. Talk about the culture for the athletes now. You kind of talked about it for the coaches. Is it the same thing for the athletes as well?
It's very similar. I think the one thing that we really do a good job here is obviously, as an athletic department, we want to have a general culture, but I also know coaches have all their own little terminology, wordage, whatever you want to say. And so when we have them become involved or when we're working with their teams, we try to match our culture to theirs. So while we still emphasize the effort added to toughness, coaches have different sayings or different focuses on what they want their team specifically. And so we try to mold that to the team. So for me, my women's basketball team's EAT, or the things we're focusing on, are a little bit different than my men's lacrosse team, just because both head coaches have different focuses or different points they really care about when it comes to weights and just the overall training aspect.
Got you. And you started hinting at it a little bit. Talk about your philosophy and what do you believe as a strength coach, and what's the foundation that you're laying down in your programming?
So my belief, or I guess my philosophy when it comes to strength conditioning, is we're going to get really good at the basics to start. I think every one of my teams can tell you they know what the first day of lift's going to be. It's going to be eccentric, slow, controlled. Make sure that we can really regroove that pattern, because whether it was coming back from winter break or coming back from summer break, I have to expect that at least 20%, but we can assume a lot more, didn't do the summer packet. And so if I just go hit the ground running, we're asking for issues. So I really make sure that those first couple training days or training weeks, we're really getting good at the fundamentals, because if we get that really well, everything else will fall in line. So even my athletes that maybe aren't as athletically or weight room gifted, if they get the basics down, can then fall in line and kind of do the more complex and more complicated things, and it makes my job a lot easier when it comes to coaching, because now I'm only tweaking instead of actually focusing on one little thing, or like focusing on 80 different people. It's like, hey, there's like one or two people I need to focus on. So that's kind of where my philosophy comes into training. And then of course, in a broader spectrum, every team's different for me. All right. So obviously I'm going to work with 5 different teams. Each training style is a little bit different. My volleyball athletes definitely are a lot different than my men's lacrosse athletes, not just from actual physical ability, but also sport requirements, okay? Men's lacrosse, they got to be able to run down the field, across the field, and all that stuff. Volleyball, if they're running all the way across the court, something went wrong. The ball is not where it's supposed to be. So I wouldn't say that I'm a believer in a certain protocol when it comes to, like, we need to increase endurance capacity, aerobic capacity, or increase anaerobic capacity, because at the end of the day, each energy system differs based off of the team. Yes, that's all important when it comes to general training, but as we get more specific, I'll vary away into what the sport actually needs and what that needs to focus on. So I guess I can sum it up as I'm a sport-specific focus or sport-specific philosophy, but again, I start very general basic no matter what the team is, and then I get into that specific realm.
Now, is there a favorite method you like using while training? Obviously, every sport is specific, but talk about maybe a method that you like to follow.
I think, again, it kind of varies on the team, but I generally fall in line with triphasic is kind of like my early, at least a lot of the eccentric. And so I would even say that it's a little bit of triphasic with Charles Poliquin. So my boss before me was big into Charles Poliquin training and how they use tempos. And so I like the patterning, the motion, the movement that comes with those slow eccentrics. So I guess that falls more in line with that Poliquin situation. But then as I kind of progress, I'll add in my isometrics and I'll add in my concentrics. And then that's when I'll transition to a more triphasic style of training. But again, I've used everything under the sun. I've used APRE, 531, conjugate. Again, everything has had a time and a place. Some things I like better that I kind of use more often, but I wouldn't say there's one that I specifically am focused on.
Got you. And very successful team that you did say you had is volleyball. So let's talk about volleyball programming and how you do. They're in their off season now. Talk about the off season programming for volleyball.
So I can say honestly, volleyball is one of the best teams to work with. They're probably my other teams are going to yell at me that I'm saying this on a podcast, but they're a lot of fun to work with. They do a really good job of working hard. So I can't say that all the training is what improves them, but they're just a team that has high expectations for themselves, and that starts from the head coach all the way down, and I'm just a piece of that. With the training, like I said, I'm very basic in our movements, kind of get them the fundamentals, right? They just came off their season. They had a heck of a season making it to the Elite Eight, so they had about a 4-week period off for winter break and then came back. They still probably are feeling the leftovers of that long season, so I'm trying to make them get better and improve while also not burning them out just yet. So again, that's where we're right now in our eccentric phase. So we're doing a lot of tempos. We did 6 seconds lowering last week. Now we're down to 3 seconds. A lot of our plyometrics is more extensive based, so I believe in getting a volume, that base, that capacity to then go to intensity. So it's a lot of patterning, grooving, just teaching them how to move and move efficiently, so that way when it comes time to moving intensely, their body can handle it and they know exactly what's expected. So they've done it, let's say, 600 times. Now, hey, we're only doing 50 times. Those 50 times are going to be hopefully perfect movements, no issues, because we've set that base.
Yeah, and again, for the people listening, dominant program here at volleyball. It's not just a flash in the pan type program, so it comes with that kind of program too from the strength coach. Are you in the off season implementing any jump program? Maybe you talked about plyometrics. Kind of talk about volleyball being a high demand jump sport.
Yeah, so I think we spend, again, a lot of time just kind of preparing the body. So I'll do a lot of stuff where it's, again, doing a lot of extensive jumps. So nothing super crazy. We'll do some intense jumps, especially on our speed days. We'll do a couple different bounds or skips for height, just kind of, and then slowly layer it on. But a lot of the stuff right now is just simple, low intensity, low impact, because I want to make sure that we get that down, and I'm not overdoing it just yet. Again, I don't need them to jump their best right now. I need them to jump their best come August, September, October, November, and hopefully December. So with their training, again, we do have plyometric training and we do some jump focus. I know that their coach does a really good job of talking about technical aspects, so I try not to teach them how to jump as much, but just reinforce what coach says. So I make sure I go to practice, see what exactly she's emphasizing, what they're teaching, and then I bring it back into the weight room and say, hey, coach really wants to focus on this right now. Let's do this. And so every year it changes a little bit, so I don't have like a this is what we're doing plan. I have guidelines, but it's always changing because one year I may have athletes that really need to work on that first push off as they go into their penultimate step. While sometimes it's, hey, we need to be quick off the ground, that takeoff, so I'm working more that reactive aspect so that way they're getting up off the ground as soon as their foot hits. So again, no clear issue or no clear path, but just kind of guidelines, and then I just fix it or mold it to whatever the team needs based off of what we have with us for the spring.
Yeah, talk about the frequency too. How often are they coming in the weight room? Are they doing extra work? How long?
So unfortunately, with our scheduling and everything, we can only get 2 days truly in the weight room as a team. So we do our Tuesdays and Fridays lift together. But again, this is where the team's really great. I can give a third day kind of up to them to do in the rec center, or I tell them, hey, the weight room will be open during this time. If you want to come in, please come in, right? I'll be there to help you, but again, it's not mandatory. And they do a really good job of, 50 to 60% of the team shows up, and I know the other 40% aren't coming because they're texting me, say, hey, coach, I want to come, but I have class. So they do a really good job of making sure they come in. And so we do, like I said, 2 days as a team, but they normally do a third day that I give for them to optionally do at their own speed, at their own discretion. And then we also do 1 day of more speed, change of direction work, which is normally before our Friday morning weight. So we'll do that, kind of get the body waked up, ready to go, run, change direction, jump, and then we'll go into the weight room, which kind of makes it nicely one big pack, and then they're done for the week, go home for the weekend. I'll see you on Tuesday.
Love that. And then transitioning into in season, how are you keeping them healthy? What injury prevention measurements are you taking? Go this long into the season. You're not just stopping November, again, late runs here. We're talking December runs here. So talk about how through a long season, how are you keeping them healthy?
Yeah, and so a lot of it, I don't have really like readiness questionnaires or like RP or anything. So a lot of it's just talking with them. So as they come in, it's like, hey, how you feeling today? And sometimes some people are like, hey, my knee is really bothering me. So it's like, okay, let's change this up. Let's cut some squats out, or hey, let's limit the weight, whatever it may be. One thing that we've done in the past 2 years, which I think has really helped, is as a staff, not just sports performance, but sports medicine and the coaching staff, we all sit down on Mondays and just discuss, hey, where's the team at, right? Hey, is there anybody we need to be worried about? And it's not just athletically, right? So it's not just injury-wise, but academically too. It's like, hey, this girl's probably struggling a little bit because she has a lot of tests coming up, or she's just not doing great. She needs to miss weights, or she needs to make up weights because she has to go to a tutoring session. So we do a really good job of having that communication, because then it's not like, I don't know what's going on because I'm in my office and coach is over across campus, right? We sit down and discuss and talk. And one thing we did introduce this year that I think has helped, I want to kind of do a little bit more next year with, is we did a small jump test at the start of every weight. So they would come in, warm up, and then during kind of the first block, they would do hands on the hips, counter movement, jump on the jump mat. And so what I would do is I would track that over a couple weeks, and then I'd use the standard deviation and kind of set up a minimum. So it's like, hey, if they jump above this, whether it's 2 inches or 0.1 inch, we're okay. But as soon as they kind of drop down, or I start seeing trends where the team starts to drop down, it's like, okay, something's going on. Let me change my training so that way we can keep them feeling fresh. So that's something that we introduced this year. I don't think it went as well as it should have or could have. But again, it was my first year. I kind of just took it with what it was. And I'm hoping to next year kind of ramp it up and make it more beneficial to the team as a whole.
Yeah, and I learned, funny you say that, I learned the same thing. I walked into Wichita State one day, baseball, talked to the baseball strength coach, and they did the same thing. It's called the Sayers equation. And if, for anybody listening, well, what it does is the same exact thing. You track over time, are they progressing or regressing? And you can start, based on the standard deviation that you set, you can catch athletes who are starting regress and overtrain, and you can change up their workouts based off of that. So awesome you say that. We were going to start this here at Ferris, but we didn't have a jump mat, so we just recently got a jump mat and started. We're doing it now in off season. So again, it's cool that the coach can see all that kind of stuff as well. On the flip side, shin splints are always a thing in volleyball with all the jumping. How do you handle that?
And again, I think that's the communication piece that I'm really appreciative of with our whole staff. So a lot of the time, our athletic trainer does a really good job of talking to me and saying like, hey, just as a heads up, this girl's having a couple shin splints act up. She's not feeling great, but it's kind of a case-by-case basis. We're very fortunate where we have that communication, so it's super easy to adjust as needed. So it may be, hey, her shins are acting up today. It may be because she had a bad day, or it may be, hey, she just played a weekend tournament and played in all 4 games. She's not feeling it, so it's like, okay, cut the jumps out. So we try our best to mitigate those pains and those issues. Again, I believe where like your best ability is availability when it comes to training. So if I need to cut out my 4 sets of 2 box jumps because that's going to make her feel better going into the game on Tuesday, then yes, we're cutting out the box jumps because I want her to feel good on the games on Tuesday. So it's a lot of case-by-case basis. If I start to see everything kind of peak all at once, that's when I would kind of go back in my training and say, okay, where can I adjust? But generally, if it's like 1 or 2 girls, we kind of just adjust their program but stick to the plan because majority of them are feeling good and still improving upon the program.
Love that. And so you talked about scheduling as well, how they have to come in on their own time. Do you have 2 weight rooms, 1 weight room, and then talk about teams as a whole scheduling? Because I know it's a headache for me, really anywhere I've been, is at the Division II level. So talk about how you handle scheduling as the director.
So we have 1 weight room that is available for athletic use. So we do have a recreational weight room, which again, it helps us if we want to give optional work or additional work the athletes can go do on their own. The one issue with that is they're limited in their equipment, obviously because it's a rec room, they're not really training athletes. And also they don't allow certain movements. So they don't love Olympic movements in there. So it limits some of the movements that we can program. And again, we go around it and do our best we can. We only have 1 weight room here and it has 12 racks. It's about 2,700 to 3,000 square feet. So I would say the best number of athletes we fit in at a time is about 45. Some teams we squeeze in a little bit more, which becomes a little bit of a mess, chaos, but it's fun. But so that's kind of how our scheduling goes. So we can't really get more than 1 team in at a time. Makeup athletes are a little bit different, but generally if it's baseball's time, it's baseball's time. If it's basketball's time, it's basketball's time. So we don't have the freedom to kind of combine groups, which we wish we could. And we're actually in the process of planning and trying to build a new facility, which we're excited about. But right now, that's what we have. So for the scheduling aspect, I try my best to be fair to all teams. I try to guarantee at least 2 days of training in both in-season and out-of-season. Generally, I try to provide a third for out-of-season teams because a lot of teams like that. The only team that does 4 days is our football team. But when it comes to the actual scheduling aspect, I do sometimes a little bit different than a lot of people I've talked to, and it could be similar for some, but I actually give priority to my out-of-season teams. So I try and get them scheduled first, only because 90% of the time, they're going to be ones that come consistently. So I've known where the team.
That's great advice for anybody listening too, because I completely agree. But continue.
No, and it's something I learned when I was at Ithaca. My boss would give priority to the in-season teams and then the out-of-season teams. And he had a good reasoning, right? They have to move around their practice schedule, so it's harder. But my issue I've always seen is in-season teams, especially as you get throughout the season, whether it's a random makeup game or there's a game at a random time, they'll cancel lift. And if I give them 4 o'clock on a Tuesday, that's a prime time spot for a lot of our student athletes. And so if you miss, let's say, 6 of those lifts, that's 3 weeks of lifts that I could have given to an out-of-season team that was going to maybe miss 1, if any. So I try my best to organize it that way. Again, now I try to guide them like, hey, let's not all schedule on Monday, please, because that's when everybody wants to train. Let's do maybe like a Wednesday because that's when the in-season teams play. Doesn't always work out that way, but again, I kind of guide them, but I normally give them the freedom to pick first because they're the ones that we're always going to have. Because there's nothing worse than I tell a coach, hey, sorry, you can't have 4 o'clock, and then they come by and it's like, hey, 4 o'clock's been open for 3 weeks. What are we doing here? So that's where it's like we try our best to make it the most efficient and functional. So I'm always going to upset somebody. I've learned that very quickly.
Yeah,
but
you always ruffle some feathers.
But that's kind of how our scheduling goes. And then again, it's just we adjust and go as best needed, right? If we have available time and a team wants to move their lift time, we always say yes, but it's just there's not always available times for them to move their lifts.
So another successful programs you run, both lacrosses. Season starting up here, correct?
Yep. Our men's team actually had their first game last Saturday, so it was fun to watch them play. Our girls start this Saturday, so I'm excited to watch.
Love that. So talk about how you prepared them. Talk about the off season. What do you have to do? Are you doing the conditioning? Because it is a lot of running. Just kind of go through the whole off season with that.
Absolutely. So I'm very fortunate. So when I first got here, both head coaches were more involved, or I guess had say over the conditioning and their speed and agility. So it was just kind of weight room world. And so I took over men's lacrosse as soon as I got here. Women's lacrosse was kind of a late addition because my boss had them, and when he left and I stepped into his role, that's when I took them over. But both of them have kind of given me the freedom to do more of their conditioning and speed and agility, which is something that I really love. It's a lot of fun to do. I think, again, weight room's great, it's important, but at the end of the day, the sport is played on the field. So we need them not only to be strong, but they got to be fast. They got to be efficient in their movements, and then they just got to be able to last the whole game or whole time they're playing their sport. So early on, I take a lot more, again, similar like extensive focus in their speed, agility, conditioning. It's a lot bigger of an aerobic base, right? They're not practicing as much. I'm just trying to get their legs and their lungs under them. So we'll do a lot more tempo-based work, some different change of direction tempos that I've kind of tinkered with and created thanks to a lot of different people I've talked to. And then our speed and agility is very basic, right? I'm teaching the fundamentals. Agility, I go back to square one where it's like, hey, how do we stop? Not even like making the cut, but like, how do I put my body in the right spot to then get out of it and move efficiently? Same thing with the speed, right? Teaching them just how to take those first couple steps. How do you accelerate? How do you start to get to top speed? And then as we go throughout the semester, I then start to implement more complex, more high-intensity things where the conditioning may shorten down, right? We'll do more sprint-based intervals. Obviously, everyone has different opinions on when it comes to shuttles, especially like 300s. I do implement them. I think they're beneficial in a time and a place. I wouldn't do all my training that way, but we will do some shuttles, some conditioning, especially just to get them ready for what the demands of practice are going to be, especially when they first come back in that spring. So I'll do that a little bit later, right? When they come back, they're going from, hey, we just had winter break and a little bit of running to 2 days, 2.5 hour practices. Like, it's a lot. So I try my best to make sure that their bodies are prepared. And sometimes we got to do some more, I guess, not functional or I guess technically backing, right, movements, but again, it's helping them prepare for what the demands of they're going to be expected of. But early off season in that middle, we do a lot more of that linear speed work, building up that max velocity, and then change of direction work, just starting simple, going to complex, sort of leaving that planned and then going to reaction, right? It's like, hey, first drill, you're going to do what I say you to do, and you're doing it, and you know exactly what to do. 3 weeks later, it may be a very similar drill, but now you're not reacting off of your mind of what I just told you. You're reacting off of the partner in front of you, and you got to avoid them, get to them, whatever it is that the drill is. So that's kind of how I progress the off season when it comes to their speed and agility. And then weight room, same thing, right? I start very basic, very simple, similar model with triphasic, eccentric, isometric, really teach the pattern of the movement, and then I'll slowly add in some more complex movements, whether it's more of a hang snatch, or starting from like a hang snatch pull into a hang snatch, hang clean pull into hang clean, trap bar deadlift to deadlift, right? Whatever it is we're trying to do, we get a little bit more complex. But again, that's because we set that foundation and the rooms become very easy to run and not as much me running around trying to coach. It's just correcting little things.
Yeah, and Coach, you're dropping some knowledge here, man. I'm loving this because I'm not, I've never grown up around lacrosse and I've never coached lacrosse. So how much of it is field work that you're doing with them? Because that's where all the power conversion comes from. You kind of mentioned it, but are they starting on the field and then going to the weight room?
Yeah, so ideally, if we had the schedule and the ability, I would love to do all my teams start in the weight or start on the field and then transition to the weight room. I think again, that's just we always talk about when it comes to training. Hey, we need to do our fast, explosive movements and then go to our strength movements. Well, if we're looking at the force velocity curve, right, the fastest thing you can do is sprint. So let's start there and then work into it. Again, college athletics, not a perfect world, so we don't have that opportunity. So we'll do our conditioning on our Tuesday, Thursdays, and then we'll lift Monday, Wednesday, Friday for our teams. And so that's men's lacrosse. Women's lacrosse has a little bit of a different schedule, but we follow the same model. We don't lift and run on the same day. But that's kind of how it transitions. And so I try my best to use those runs and lifts to kind of play off of each other. So if it's going to be an acceleration focused day, I may spend more time doing more bilateral, I guess, more frontal plane movements for those days, just to kind of, again, reinforce those positions, reinforce those body movements. And then maybe on a change of direction day, we'll do a little bit more unilateral and lateral work, right? So that's where maybe I'll do a lateral squat or lateral lunge and some different lateral movements to then go into the next day where it's like, hey, we're doing change of direction agility. And I try to tell them, hey, you remember that movement we did yesterday with the weight that was very controlled? Now let's not go uncontrolled, but let's make that violent and fast, right? We just did this in a controlled manner. We loaded it. Now we're unloaded. Let's make that movement make sense.
And talk about the in season now. Probably the same thing with volleyball, I'm assuming, but talk about how you keep them healthy, and is there anything different you're doing from volleyball to lacrosse? Talk about the frequency in the weight room, just any kind of in season advice you have.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's, again, talking with the athletes, right? And again, when you have a bigger team, you got to kind of pick and choose the people you talk to. If I talk to my fourth string guy off the bench and I ask him, hey, how you feeling? He's like, Coach, I feel great. Let's squat heavy. It's like, great. I'm glad you feel great. But then our starting attackman looks like he's like barely just getting into the weight room. Like he can't even run in. He's limping in. Like I need to talk to those guys. So with the bigger teams, I don't use as much of the, I guess, like jump testing or testing matters just because I don't have enough time. Our men's lacrosse team is 55 strong, which is awesome. A lot of guys in there, a lot of juice. But there's a lot of people on top of each other. So asking them to jump and move around, it becomes more of a headache than an actual help. So that's a lot more of the conversation. And again, I just kind of see how they play, right? If they look a little bit sluggish or they look a little bit down, I'll adjust them as needed. I'll work with them as they need to. I have a couple of our defensemen who are having some issues, right? I'll adjust, right? I'll say, hey, instead of doing Nordics today, let's do leg curls, right? You're not feeling great. That's okay. I'm not going to be married to a movement because at the end of the day, again, I need them to be able to feel good on the field. I don't care how good they feel in the weight room. Women's lacrosse is the same thing. Conversations, talking. They're a little bit smaller, so it's easier to kind of get a read on them. And again, I'm more flexible with their training too, where it's like, hey, 50% of the team comes in and they look like they're half asleep because we go 7 a.m. and they're not awake. Either I start the warm-up with a game, or it's like, hey, surprise, we're cutting out 2 sets of squats, and that all of a sudden wakes them up. So just little things on adjusting and modifying. So that way, it may, in the grand scheme of things, not really be helping them feel better. But if their head thinks they're feeling better, then that's half the battle.
course. And you mentioned bar moving fast, being explosive. Do y'all have any VBT or technology that you use?
We don't. We really just use Coach's Eye right now. Again, I think it's hard with our spot and our facility because a lot of that stuff would take up more room than actually be beneficial. I also have a relatively smaller budget compared to some schools. Again, not the worst, but we do. So I can't justify spending money on equipment like that when I look over and we have a couple bands that are about to snap. I'm like, I need to pay for those first before I can get some of that cool equipment, which I want to at some point, right? I'm not against it, but I just think priority falls on equipment first, making sure that we have stuff that can be functional, and then we can have some of those tools that we can use later. So a lot of Coach's Eye, a lot of just kind of hearing and seeing how their bodies move, how the bars kind of cling and clank and as they move, because that's a good, I guess, way to see for us, and is a good cue of, okay, are we where we need to be, or are we kind of off the path?
Yeah, and that's the reality of a Division two strength coach. Even at the a high level program like Wingate, where you really don't need it. But talk about adversity. Whenever adversity happens with a team, maybe with you, how are you handling it, and what are you telling the teams?
Yeah, so, and this is something that I think, going back to like one of your first questions, like how do we help, or how do I help my coaches kind of grow and be, I don't want to say better, but to become better versions of themselves. I think the biggest thing for us is no matter what happens on the field, right, whether it's practice, games, right, I've been with teams where the seasons did not go the way they wanted to. I've been with teams where they thought they were making it to the NCAA tournament. They're there on tournament day or the selection show, and their name doesn't show up. And so there's nothing worse than being in that room and seeing those athletes. But my job or my goal is to be the same coach for them regardless of their results. Because at the end of the day, if we truly want to see them develop and be better, we can't let them know or feel that remorse or that disappointment and carry into other things that they're doing, right? Obviously, again, you can feel sad, you can feel bad, but I tell them, hey, when you walk through these doors, I'm going to be the same energy guy, whether we beat a team by 10 or we lose by 10. I'm going to be there and make the juice, have fun, we're going to work, and nothing's going to change in here. And that constant is something I try to teach my coaches, where that's the most important thing for us, right? At the end of the day, X's and O's are great, but as long as we are constantly teaching, constantly improving, and constantly coaching, then the experience for the student athletes is that much better. And the losses, even though they sting, hopefully sting a little bit less because they know that they can come to us and we're going to have just as much fun, whether it was a good day or a bad day.
Love that. And then talk about nutrition. What's the nutrition situation look like, and how are you developing athletes like that? And then also any tips you can give other strength coaches.
Yeah, so that's something that I guess is kind of like my next big task or my next big project. Obviously, nutrition's critical when it comes to training. So we try to educate our athletes, whether it's a conversation between us. Some athletes may come talk to me about nutritional advice. Obviously, it's a hard situation to talk because we can only give so much information. We're not registered dietitians, so I can't give them a meal plan. But we try and educate them and teach them the basics so that they can just make the right decisions when they're on their own. Something we are trying to grow is grow our nutritional budget and department a little bit, because right now, nutrition's really a case by case on the team. So if a team wants protein, a team wants supplements, they need to buy it off their budget. We'll hold it and we'll provide it to the teams, but at the end of the day, it comes out of their budget as opposed to ours. We're trying to slowly grow a fund, and so whether it's through donors, additional funding, or whatever it is, we're trying to kind of get to that point where we can provide just some nutritional items, nutritional supplements. And I'll give a shameless plug. If anybody has any ideas, I would love to hear about it, because I've tried about everything. I've talked to about everybody, and I'm still without the nutrition after 2 years. So anybody that's got any good insight, I would really appreciate it. I don't really have much more than that to that, unfortunately, but that's where we're at.
Well, it's definitely a money pit. Like you're basically feeding these people who don't eat all day. The reality is they can go to the cafeteria and they have all this stuff, but they're not eating. If they do, they're eating a cheeseburger and fries. So it is a tough topic and conversation to have. But you also mentioned donors. Talk about fundraising. Are you having to fundraise?
Yeah, and so we have a very good fundraising, I guess, I don't want to say department, but a fundraising group. So he was the old baseball head coach, Coach Bill Nash. He's kind of what they call the Bulldog Club and is the main fundraiser. And he does a great job in connecting us with different people, and he helps out a lot. And so when it comes to donors, for a lot of the smaller donations, it's up to us to kind of go search and reach out. Like I had mentioned, we're in the process of trying to build a new weight room. And so hopefully we can find some donors, and that kind of falls on our athletic director more. But for us, it's a lot more of the smaller groups, whether it's a local company or we're reaching out to parents or alumni or whoever it is. We kind of just ask, like, we have a fundraising day in April called One Day, One Dog, which is like our big fundraising day. And we've become more involved with that. When I first got here, we didn't even have like a web page to donate to. It was just kind of like, hey, if you want to give us money, great. But now we have a web page that kind of encourages people to donate that money to us to kind of help improve our facilities and our weight room, which again is a little bit most of the time because we're kind of fighting with the other teams for the same people, but any donation really helps us out greatly.
Love that. And I mean, Coach, you're smart, man. You're brilliant. Talk about resources that you use. What other things can strength coaches do to develop their mindset about things?
Again, I think the biggest thing for me, and this is why I love like your podcast and just generally any strength coach in the smaller realm, is they're very easy to talk to and just connect with. I think that's my biggest resource. Obviously, I read a lot of books and a lot of research, and I listen to podcasts, and that's all great. But at the end of the day, I get a lot of my best ideas when I talk to other coaches just to kind of pick their brains. And sometimes I may listen to a podcast or look at something like, hey, I want to talk more specifically about that. Or sometimes it's like, you know what? Hey, I just want to talk shop with you. Whatever information you want to give, I would greatly appreciate. And so that's something that I definitely try to utilize, is just other coaches around. And I'll reach out to anybody. Sometimes I get no responses. Sometimes the schedules just don't line up. But I think, again, that's kind of my biggest resource, because I love to talk about training with other people because there's a lot of different perspectives. And so if I read something and I understand something, I think that's great. But then I may talk to another strength coach and they had a completely different perspective that I never even thought of. But now I do have it because I got to talk to them. So that's really my biggest, I guess, like growth, or my biggest resource when it comes to trying to improve my knowledge and understanding of strength conditioning.
Yeah, what about any books or articles that you would suggest as well?
Man, there's a long list of that. I think, again, there's like certain fundamental books that every strength coach has read or I think is good to read. The big ones for me, I think, fall under, so Mike Boyle's Functional Strength and Conditioning. That's a really big one. But again, my boss also had worked under Mike Boyle, so I'm a little biased with that. I have an assistant here who worked for Peter Ken at SMU, so Joe Ken's son. So the tier system, I know that's not the book, it's something bigger than that, but that's the tier system book is something that I recommend. I think it does a really good job. I love Mark Ripeto's books. I think he does a great job on practical programming of just breaking down the basics. That's actually one of our first books we give to our interns every year, just because, again, it's making the scientific make more sense and become more practical, right? Because again, you can read 8 different research articles and they all say this, but then you look at it and you're like, I can't apply that in here, right? You say I have to give an 8-minute rest time. I can't even give a 30-second rest time. Like, we got to go. So I like the Mark Ripeto's book for explaining that stuff. So I guess if I had to choose 3 off my head, and a 4th one is triphasic. I talk so much about triphasic, I can't not include that one. So,
of course.
And I actually just recently bought his second book. I haven't been able to open it yet, but I'm excited to kind of see what information. Cal Dietz, yeah, he released his second book, I guess, a couple months ago. So I just bought that off Amazon. It's in my bookshelf right now. So I'm excited to read that in the next couple of months. So.
Love that. And so talk about any mentors that you've had along the way. You know, what have you rubbed any shoulders with any guys that you maybe want to give a shout out to?
Man, you got like 20 minutes.
Go, let's hear it.
I think so. I mean, I'm going to kind of start from the beginning and work up. I think my first internship at Temple University, I had 4 great coaches I worked with. So the one who's still there, the head, Coach Tim Teefee, he was great in allowing me to kind of learn and work with them. But with his staff was Coach Mike Inman, Coach Sam Whitney, and then Coach Kendra Miller. They all were great. They helped me learn. And again, that was my first experience in strength conditioning world, kind of learning from them and just understanding what it's like to not just go to a local gym or like a Planet Fitness and get your workout. It's like, how is it actually to train college athletes? So grateful for them to kind of open my eyes to that. I can't forget about Coach Victor Brown at Ithaca. He was my boss when I was a GA. He taught me so much. He was my first person to really let me run my own programs. And so he did a great job, let me fall on my face a couple times, but he was there to help pick me up, kind of lead me. Villanova, Coach Mike Tucker, Coach Sean Doherty, and then Coach Kevin Miller, Coach Colin Masterson. They were all great. I learned a lot from them. I think they kind of, where what I learned in the weight room at Temple, I learned on the field at Villanova. They introduced me to the high-low system with Charlie Francis, sprint training, James Smith. All that stuff was novel to me, right? You gave me that book, and I'm like, this is the greatest thing in the world. And they're like, yeah, this book's been around for a while. But they definitely helped me out a lot, which I'm truly appreciative of. And then I guess my last mentor that I really had a lot of close connection with, or two actually, I'm sorry, was Zach Singleton and Neil Wilczynski. So they were both people I worked under when I was a GA here at Wingate. They really helped me kind of develop what Wingate is today. As much as I talk about, or people ask me, what is your program? I can't take all credit. A lot of that stuff I kind of piggybacked off of what they had built and developed. And so a lot of the culture, a lot of the attitudes that the teams had were great and awesome because of what they laid that foundation, and then I kind of built off of. Again, I don't want to list every name. All of my interns, all of my assistants, my associates, they've all been great. Because like I said, I try my best to hire people that aren't like me, and so I learn from them. There's stuff that I do now that I wouldn't have done 2 years ago before I hired them on my staff. So I think, again, strength and conditioning, as much as it is a very close-knit network, is something that you learn a lot from other people. And I always tell my GAs, hey, I'm a thief of all. All right, I'll give you credit, but I steal everything you've ever seen. There's no original thought in my head, just because someone's probably already thought of it who's a lot smarter than me.
And the last question before we leave, talk about what advice you wish you knew as a young strength coach. What do you know now that maybe you wish you would have known earlier?
I think the biggest thing, and this is something where I still try to have to remind myself, is at the end of the day, it's not as big as a deal as I think it is, or as you think it is. And so what I mean by that is, right, we always try to make sure everything's perfect, everything runs super well, everything is to the T, right? If we don't do something right, it's the end of the world. And again, I don't want us to say we shouldn't take pride in our craft, but at the same time, there were days where I'd go home when I was younger and I'd beat myself up, or I'd be like, dang, I can't believe we missed this or we messed that up. And at the end of the day, it's like 2 weeks later, they don't even remember that we messed this up or I misspoke. It's, hey, we're still getting stronger. Did they improve? Yes. Are they getting faster? Yes. Do they feel better? Yes. Did they learn something? Yes. That's the big things that I think matter, not the, hey, did that one little thing that I messed up change everything? So again, have pride in your craft, but at the same time, you can't let it harp on it on those little things, because at the end of the day, it's not as big of a deal as you make it.
Man, what some advice is that? That's awesome. And again, thank you for joining on, Coach. You dropped a lot of knowledge and, a little bit of time. I mean, that's awesome, everything you've talked about and, learning. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is so other strength coaches can listen and see how they can do things 1% better. And so again, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Coach. Can I ask you one question, though? I like to ask every coach I talk to. So I'm a book nerd, if you couldn't tell by now, and I love book recommendations. So, and I always ask this no matter who I'm talking to, so I'm kind of taking over your podcast right now. But
you're good.
A book you've read right now or currently reading, what do you recommend? Because I need to add it to my list.
So, dropping stuff. I like looking at different methods and how you can do, not reinventing the wheel, but doing something better. And so I actually saw this. I go to every, bookstore I see, and it's Complete Guide to Strength Training Methods. And so what it is every kind of method you can think about, and they have it from A to Z. And, I just recently started doing cluster sets. And so it talks about every kind of cluster set there is. I mean, there's over, 400 different methods in here. And they talk about every kind of cluster set, every kind of, max effort thing and everything like that. And so it's by Kevin, I can't even say his last name, but awesome book, awesome read. And again, it's over 200 and, 40 techniques for all kind of training, whether it's hypertrophy, strength, power, speed work, all different kind of things. So I think that's cool. Again, I'm getting to the point where I want to learn to be better. And, like you said, experiences is the best way to learn in my mind. So when you talk to other coaches and you see what works for them and what doesn't work for them, I think that's the best way to learn. So
Absolutely. Awesome.
But man, again, any other questions?
No, that's kind of my like quick hitter one. I feel like I would love to kind of talk again with you. Maybe not on the
Of
podcast, but
course.
just off air would be awesome to kind of just talk a little bit more. Maybe get to talk to you a little bit about your training and methodology and all that stuff. Because, like you said, I already said it. I love to learn from other coaches. I feel like I did all the talking this time. I need to let you talk a little bit next
No,
time.
that's you did awesome, man. And I think I'm gonna do an episode where I get interviewed. I think everybody's been asking about that. Man, people listen to me, they'd probably be like, "Man, this dude is not that smart." So again, now
No,
you learn from other people, you learn from your mistakes and your experiences, and that's just how it is, you know.
absolutely.
But again, thanks, Coach.
No, thank you. It was great being on here, and I appreciate everything you've done for with this podcast and what you're doing for the strength conditioning world.
Thank you for tuning in, and if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. You can also follow us on Instagram for more updates at Under the Barbell Strength Podcast. And if you know someone who would love this episode, please share it with them.